Let me start running. Yeah, 49 minutes left. Get going, Guy. Okay, so a quick who am I? Really, just to set the scene that I have a background of development from, starting from 1980, when some of you were minors. I don't know how old. Yeah, I can't get words out today. That's good, isn't it? That must be that beer. So, professional developer after graduating with a computer science degree. Didn't get into this Windows stuff until 1995. I was doing all this Unix stuff before, but it's just the same. It's forward slashes instead of backslashes. Now doing a lot of PowerShell for vendors like Controller that kindly mentioned me in their session this morning, Flexible IT, Avanite, a few others. I've only been doing PowerShell for about 7 years. PowerShell itself is actually a teenager. It's about, I think 14 years old now. In fact, I think it hit 13 last year. But in some ways, to me, it's just another language, although, it's an incredibly powerful and useful language, both interactively and in scripts. And because of my contributions to sort of the community around this area, because I'm always willing to try and help, I've had some of these nice award things. Okay, so why should we write robust code? Well, hopefully, if you're giving scripts to other people to run stuff, to automate stuff, or just to make somebody's life easier, it's not all about this DevOps stuff. I don't consider myself a DevOps engineer at all. Then it makes your life easier. Get it right first time, fewer problems to rectify afterwards. That's all about coding robustly getting your mindset into the game from day one. It's much easier writing the code robustly when you first churn it out than it is coming back to a script and thinking, oh, now I've got to make it robust. Now I've got to make it proper. Yeah, do it from day one. Might take a little bit longer, but believe me, it's well worth it. When I'm writing scripts, the likes of control up, and those scripts might run on systems with thousands, tens of thousands of users. You've got to make sure you get it right and do the right thing, and make sure that if something unexpected happens, that you either deal with it, report it, or otherwise know what you should or shouldn't do. Again, why not? Yeah, it's easy. Some people might say, well, I haven't got the time, but no, that's not true. Reputation? No, not just public reputation, but also within your own company. Oh, I can do a script for that. If you've had some bad scripts before to go, yeah, okay, Guy, yeah, I don't think we really need that. Go and sit back in your corner with your Christmas hat on. Yeah, do it once, do it right. We can say that with a lot of things, but it's very true here. I'm not saying I don't have problems with my scripts. Yeah, I do. But I then try and learn from them. So once you learn one technique for error handling or several, you then start using that across all your scripts and be consistent, which is quite important. But as I said, it's a mindset, but it's not difficult. Okay, so some questions to ask about the error handling when you're writing the code itself. First of all, is it going to benefit the user if they see this error? A lot of people, particularly non-PowerShell coders, still technical people, will look at the redness, the default error color coming out of a script and just run away screaming. Don't bother actually reading the message. So it's important to get that message right. Yeah, but if you don't need to show the message, just don't show it at all. Can we actually know we're going to get that error? A simple one is, I'm going to create that file in the folder you've specified. Oh, the folder doesn't exist. Should I create the folder first for you? Yeah, convenience features. Make the scripts as foolproof, as idiot-proof as possible. Not that I'm saying anybody's an idiot out there, of course. No comment. Yeah, can we fix that error? Yeah, changing the color of the error doesn't really make the problem go away, unless you're putting white text on a white background. Yeah, nothing to see here. Move on. Is it a fatal error? Is it? We just can't continue. So let's say I'm writing a Citrix automation script. I can't connect to the Citrix server that I need to use. Yeah, that's pretty fatal. Or is it just something I can work around? It's inconvenient, or maybe I can try a different server. Yeah, how resilient do you want to make things? But then when you do put the error out, make sure it's understandable. Yeah. I say mere mortals. Yeah, most of the time it's going to be technical people that are reading your error message, but I see a lot of the time people have a mental block with PowerShell. They'll say, oh, I'm not a scripter, and take pride in that, which is a bit strange in this day and age, but then not actually bother understanding what the error is. Whereas if it was an error, pop up in a dialog box or something like that, they'd look at it, research it, course, don't forget that if you've got a dialog box, you can actually hit Control-C to put the content in the clipboard for most standard Windows dialog boxes, so you don't have to typo stuff when you're searching for it on the web. If it doesn't make sense, rewrite the error message, yeah, or tell them, actually, yeah, we're kind of expecting this. You need to install KB blah 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 from this URL. Yeah, it's not quite self-healing, but it's making scripts as helpful as they can be, rather than no, I failed, go away, come back. Yeah, doesn't really help. If we do put an error out, is there any benefit to the user of giving them that error message? Error 42. Yeah, what does that mean? Yeah, well, maybe report it to somebody else, convert it to text. If it's not going to help anyone, just hide it. Yeah, but don't hide the important stuff. Well, what's important, what isn't? Well, this is where you've got to be smart, yeah, with your technical head on. Yeah, I can't find this drive where I'm supposed to be installing this app. Oh, I'll just install it somewhere else. Okay, that may be the right way to do it. It depends. Yeah, that's why we have to have half a brain with this stuff, which amazes me why I can actually do it. Okay, so check for errors. As I used to say to people, probably contentious, God invented error codes so that we can check them. If something returns an error code, then have a look at it. Yeah. Because if that's the basis of the next thing you're going to do and the previous thing's errored, is there any point doing the next thing? Well, there might be. You don't know. Again, this is very much case by case, depending on what you're doing. I need to enable this user in AD. The user doesn't exist. Right. Is that a problem? Should they really exist? So I'll throw an error, or shall I actually create the user? Yeah. Whatever you do with the error handling, be consistent. Don't have one sort of error reporting and style and one bit of script, and then even in the same script, something different, because it's going to just confuse people. It's going to confuse yourself, yeah? And one of the advantages of me being old is that I have to write code that I can look back at in a couple of months and go, who wrote this rub? Oh, it was me. So we've got to make it understandable, plenty of comments. What is this error? So, yeah, if you've got more comments than code, it doesn't matter. Sometimes there are expected errors, yeah. So you've got a script that takes a parameter for creating a folder to put its results in. I think, right, I'm going to go and create that folder. Oh, it exists already. Okay, so what do I do if it exists already? Do I need to delete it and recreate it? Do I need to delete the contents? Do I need to just stop and say, no, this folder exists already. I can't do anything because it might have content in, and it might have something important in. You want to destroy it. And so, I'll destroy it anyway. Yeah, but what if someone's accidentally put in, Windows System 32 as a destination folder for something, and you go and start deleting stuff in Windows System 32? Yeah, that'll be quite amusing for a while. So, think about what you can do. Always think, every time you write a line of code, think, how could this fail? How could this go wrong? How could I break this? Which is kind of a good QA attitude. That's why I've always been able to break software in the past. They used to call me the bug whisperer when I worked at AppSense. I didn't work in QA, but I could certainly break things by trying to use them and think, well, what could go wrong to break this? That could happen in the real world. Yeah. If you are throwing away an error in your code, not necessarily even telling a user, put a comment as to why it's not fatal, why you're ignoring it, to help you and other people. Right host, go away. There are a few places to write host, but I digress. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, I've come across these recently. I'm not going to name any names, but there are various channels within output channels within PowerShell, something they've inherited or taken the idea of from Unix, and they're quite happy to admit that. So you've probably seen things like stood out, stdr, for instance, standard out, standard error. You've probably even used them maybe even in those legacy batch scripts, where you do greater than &1, which is stood out, or greater than &2, which is error. So the theory is you put an error out to the error channel. That's what comes out in red. You put it to standard out, it just comes out in your default color, which is quite often white. But if that's an error message, it's A, not going to look like an error message, and B, you might miss it, because not all third-party modules are great. Some write their errors using right host, which means you can't actually catch it very easily. This is a nasty one. to watch out for is just inconsistent. You have to know what it is you're calling, particularly if you're what's called p-invoking, platform invoking into Windows APIs, which again you can do with PowerShell. So pretty much anything you can do in C#, you can do in PowerShell. Is that 0 can be an error because it's false. Anything which isn't 0 is true, not necessarily 1, but anything which is non-zero is true, so that's a success, whereas 0 is failure. But also in the Windows API, there's something called error_success, which is defined as 0. So quite often you might see an erroneous dialog box pop up and go, error 0 or no error. Again, that's because people are reporting the wrong thing. So just know what sort of error you're getting back. And if you're writing functions that return errors, make sure you document what it is you're actually returning. It's always a good idea if you're writing a function, to make sure that it returns something. I'll mention this later on, but if you're copying and pasting chunks of code, like I've seen in some people's public scripts, it probably means you need to put that into a function with some parameters. And does it make sense for that function to return a value? Who knows? Okay, so how do we check? Well, we look at the return value. How do we do that? Well, we just assign it to something, or we can look at $? So for instance, if let's do a little bit of demoing. I haven't got a lot of time. First time out for this session was 2 hours, which Alex wouldn't unfortunately give me. So I'm trying to squeeze it all into 50 minutes. So if we call something, we can get a return from it, and then we can decide if we're going to use that or not. So for instance, one way of, $null, well done, guy, dollar something. If you're writing a script, make sure you use meaningful variables. When we're doing stuff interactively, you can get away with being a little bit lazy. Obviously, I'm just demoing anyway, equals, dir. If I do dir on its own, it's actually an alias for getChildItem, but then I can see that, that's got some content, dollar something. So I can say dollar something, that's equal $null. No, it doesn't. If not equal $null, but I can also then say, if I do a dir of, let's hope this doesn't exist, look at $? So I can look, I don't necessarily need to get the result of that. I can look $? But make sure if you're looking at $? Which is the return of, or the status of the previous command, make sure you get it straight away. Because if you do another command, then $? is going to be returned for that command. Obviously, then if you need to save it, you can do something like last error. Oh dear, it must get this keyboard replaced. And then we can refer to it later if we want to do something else. Anyway, so always check on that if it makes sense to do so. There is built-in error variable, which actually is an array. Good idea if you're writing a script just to clear errors before you go in, so you don't start trying to clear up errors that actually happened in the calling environment. So we can actually see now. So if I do a dir, in fact, let's look $error. You can see I'm actually going back quite a long way. So the one at the top, because it always inserts at the top, will be my most recent error. Cannot find a drive F, so that was one I just did, and then various ones from stuff I've been doing in this PowerShell window. In fact, in good old Windows Terminal, which was started at 10:31 on the 17th. So useful stuff in my PowerShell profile there. Control L to clear the screen rather than CLS. So we can actually see how many errors. Again, I'm going to tab complete because PowerShell is great for lazy people like me. I've actually got 40 errors. Hey guy, I thought you were a professional. 40 errors. But of course we can then clear that if needs be. So then it's always a good idea to do that before you go into your script. So you start with a clean plate. So if I then do a dir::xmas, then we can see error is just one thing. So make sure you're catching your errors. But what you can do if you need to is actually have your own error variable. So rather than using error count, so we'll call this guys error. Notice there's no $ in front of it because it's the name of a variable, not actually a variable itself. So I'm still getting the error out, but what I could do is I could actually say error action silently continue, which is the equivalent of, well, not actually, it's not quite the equivalent of VBS on resume next. So, oh, look, no error. Well, no. I mean, $? Still says it failed. And if we look at Guy's error, a driver in the name G does not exist. Yeah. So I can get that error, I can keep it, I can look at it and process it later on if I need to. But again, as we said earlier, or as I said earlier, and you listened to, I hope, that it's not always a good idea to report errors, depending on what they are. So there we see the error variable. Minus pass-through is quite useful for if you're adding a member or something, for instance. Quite a lot of commands have a pass-through. So let's do something like start process. Notepad.exe, you may have heard of Notepad. It's quite a useful hacking tool. Text editor. So that started a Notepad, but did it start okay? Well, $? Kind of tells me that, but what I could also do is minus pass-through. Yeah, so, and assign that to variable, $proc. Again, because I'm just writing this interactively, trying to be quick, yeah? So I can then test $proc. Yeah, $proc minus equal null. False, yeah. So if it returns something, it has actually worked. So I don't necessarily need to look at $? And then I can start to put that in code. I mean, one of the things I do, some people don't like this style, but I can then go, it just reduces the amount of stuff you need to type. So I'm assigning and testing all in the same statement. Or one-liners. Beware of one-liners. One-liners are kind of handy for interactive PowerShell for scripts, unless you're getting performance benefits where you've got lots of piping. It just makes it more difficult to read. So I'm not a fan of one-liners, but I'm a fan of compact code as long as it doesn't make it more difficult to understand either for yourself or others who are going to take your script. Failed. Can't multitask. Yeah, so there's my notepad. We know it's worked, created. Whereas if I start on Schnotepad, the Dutch version, yeah, then we can see it failed. Actually didn't get the fail because it threw an exception, which we'll come to later. So that's where pass-through can be useful for testing whether something's worked. I use it a lot with things like add member. Also helps with pipelines. Belt and braces, as in 2 methods to keep your trousers up. Or shorts, as I'm sat here wearing shorts. Not that it's hot, because I had to de-ice the car last night. Not cool. No, it was cool. For instance, so if you create a folder and the folder creation doesn't return an error, is it really important that that folder's created? Is it possible that it might have failed? I mean, if you're creating a new item, for instance, new item minus path, Alex. Yeah, you notice that it actually outputs the object to the standard output. So what I could have done is actually say $new folder equals. But you notice that's when I said there's an error. So I probably want to do an error action silently continue. So $new folder is null. But that's not an error because new folder already existed. So what I might want to now do is do a test path of. Notice I'm always using name parameters. Again, you can get away with not using that interactively. We can use positional parameters, but in scripts, always use named parameters. Not exactly difficult to type because you can tab complete them, and it just helps people understand what's going on, particularly if you've got things like file copies where is it for the source first or the destination first? Yeah, if you use minus source and minus destination path, then there's no ambiguity. So I can say Alex. Yeah, so I could do that in an if statement. So belt and braces. Sometimes overkill maybe. I don't do that all the time, but if something's important, particularly if I know I'm calling perhaps a third-party command that might not necessarily always work in terms of errors, because we test this stuff and then we test it again, then use that belt and braces approach. So exceptions are a different type of error there, as in it's not just a return code, because the idea being that they're designed to simplify error checking, so they come from sort of C++ and C# and other languages. So the idea is that if you're 10 levels deep down in function calls and you've got a problem, if you throw an exception, the code unwinds, as in goes back up the stack, trying to find a handler, so some code that will do something with that exception. If it doesn't find one, ultimately, PowerShell will exit. Ultimately, something like a C# program will actually crash. You'll see unhandled exception. Exceptions are good things sometimes. It's a way to communicate. And I'd say it's also an efficient way of getting out of a deep structure without having to test at every single level. But yeah, it can cause problems, particularly if you're expecting an error code and you get an exception. And again, do you test every single thing that could throw an exception? So your code becomes try catch this, try catch that, try catch, which means it's difficult to see the proverbial wood for the trees because all you can see is try catch. Or do you put one try catch around everything and go, oh, there was an exception? Well, the disadvantage of doing the one around everything is it's very difficult to get specific about a particular exception. If you get an exception thrown because something doesn't exist, and if you catch it explicitly, then you can create that item, maybe, if that's the solution to the problem. So if you've bubbled right up to the top of your code, so you're a long way away from where it was created, it's too late. You've come back up the code. Well, you could go back down again. You could have it in a for loop, for instance. Don't copy and paste the same call. Have a for loop or a while loop with a way to get out as well. Common mistake I see when people are retrying stuff. It's good to retry if there's a way that if there's a reason that something might have failed. Maybe it's copying something and the network went down, so let's retry. But let's not do infinite retries. Let's have a counter in there which says when I've had more than 10 retries, or ideally make it a parameter which you can change. So hard coding is the devil's work, which is why I have huge parameter blocks in some of my scripts, because I don't like hard coding anything, so it's much easier to change. And for those people who write the scripts that have lots of things you need to change in the script, the more chance there, of course, is that someone's going to break something by not putting quotes in, particularly if they're a non-PowerShell person. Whereas if you make the parameters with a default, if people don't specify it, it takes the default, which is what you would have hard coded anyway. Otherwise, they can change it. And the other thing, if you're doing lots of retries, is probably have a pause, which is a start-sleep in PowerShell, so that you're not burning a hole in the CPU. If at first you don't succeed, try again is a good adage, but try again after a small pause, I think, is probably a better way of putting that. And sleep doesn't have to be seconds, it can actually be milliseconds. So you might want to sleep for 200 milliseconds. Depends what it is. But make sure you've got a way of getting out so you're not stuck in an infinite loop. We can ignore exceptions. We have an empty catch block. It goes, I'm not interested in that. I use that occasionally. So for instance, if you're using a hash table or a dictionary, which is a great collection item to use in PowerShell, if the item has already been added, so it's got the same key, it will throw an exception. But sometimes I'm expecting that and I'm not interested, so I'll just have an empty catch block. But if you're ignoring something like that, as I said earlier, put a comment in. Why are you ignoring it? Why is this not a fatal error? So if you've got a catch block, you can actually look at the exception. So we don't look at $error there. We look at $_. So we can actually look to see if it is a specific exception. So for instance, in the example I was giving earlier with a dir of a G drive, which doesn't exist, then that's one of those exceptions. It's like, how did you know it was that exception? Well, you generate the exception yourself, and in your catch block, you look at $_exception, you do the get type, and then you just get its full name. And that will tell you what you need to put in there. So quite simple. One I keep forgetting, to be honest with you, every time I think, I'm going to catch that specific exception. You can do string matches as well. So in your catch block, if you say $_exception dot toString minus like star drive not found, or minus match if you're okay with regular expressions. And don't run away screaming just because I mentioned regular expressions, please. They're actually quite simple. No, they can be quite simple and effective. They can also be quite scary, and some even scare me. Also, I quite often use a try-catch block where there's not really much in the catch because I'm handling errors properly anyway. But the beauty of a try-catch is you can have a finally clause as well. So you have your try in your curly brackets, your catch, your curly brackets, and then finally in curly brackets. So I quite often use that around my main code so that in my finally I can close log files, I can delete temporary files. If scripts are halted prematurely, again, it will always go into the finally block, so you can tidy up. Anything you create, if you're creating megs and megs of temporary files, and if they're not required, please tidy them up. And the trouble is, if you've got a long line of code where you've got lots of points where you exit, if there's an error, you don't want to keep repeating the tidy up code. You could put it in a function. A more elegant way is to just have a try catch finally, because the finally block will get executed whether you've got an exception or not. How long have I got? 24 minutes. Hey, loads of time. Yeah, we see this sometimes with our control scripts because of the coding standards, and this is to do with the error action preference, which we'll talk about later. Generally, if it's going to tell you it's at line 1, char 1, it's lying. Yeah, it's somewhere else. So we've seen that with the control scripts when we set error action to stop globally. If it hits an error on line 426 or 424, it won't tell you that line number. It'll tell you line 1, which is not particularly useful, but we can override that actually by changing the error action option, which is, as long as you're using commandlet binding, you can use in your own functions as well. Another way of writing robust, or to help you write robust code, is make sure that you type things, as in if you're declaring something. So if I'm, let's say I want a counter, which, so I'm going to say $index equals 0. I'm not going to use $I because I hate $I. It doesn't tell me anything. What type is that? Well, PowerShell has figured out that that's an integer. Yeah, I didn't want a string. Why not? Well, because I put quotes around it, so it'll figure that out itself. And it's what I said before about getting the type. So if I needed to, I could actually call it system.int32, although what you find in PowerShell, you can always drop the initial system dot. And if you want to get that into the clipboard, actually set -clipboard. So a lot of the time I'll just put stuff into SCB, which needs, I think, PowerShell 4 or above, but doesn't put new lines on like clip.exe does. And then that's in my clipboard. So if I now right click, or what you can do is get clipboard. So quite often if I'm doing stuff, rather than having to go via Notepad, I can just do a GCB piped into whatever I need to use my clipboard. And that'll work if I've got Ks and Ks of data in my clipboard. So use a clipboard in your, not so much in your scripts, but certainly interactively. Then you don't have to use Notepad or Notepad++ for temporary files. But what I mean by strongly typing is this. So when I actually declare it, I'm going to declare it as an int without quite so many ends. Yeah. Why? Well, because whatever I'm using, whether I'm using PowerShell ISE, yes, I'm a Luddite and I'll carry on using that, or I'm using the nice fancy Visual Studio Code or some other environment, it's going to help me with my IntelliSense, as in my tab completing. It'll also help me catch errors in the code where I'm using something which isn't valid for it. It will catch that earlier, so it's more likely to catch that even before runtime. Yeah, thanks, Sam. Yeah. So strong type, and notice what I'm also doing is initializing. Now this is a habit from my old days. Remember, I was programming in C via green screens over serial lines to Unix boxes I used to write the device drivers for when you were potentially not even born, back in the 80s, when the best music was. And back then, if you didn't actually assign a default to something, you got a random value, something that was previously on the stack. It wouldn't guarantee to be 0. Another reason for declaring stuff is if you typo something. So if I later manage to misspell index, and stupid boy, I didn't mean to assign it. Let's put another N in. Then it's not going to tell you. But if I set something called strict mode, version latest, I can actually type. Of course, I could just tab complete like a, no, I can't actually tab complete that one. Not everything can be tab completed. Not everything, most things in the universe. So I can set strict mode. So if I now say $guy, oh, look, so my same as with my dollar index. Yeah, so strict mode is your friend. It's your first sort of bastion of writing better code. I would never set that in a production script inside the script because you're asking for trouble. But when you're writing the script, yeah, I've got it in my PowerShell profile, always set strict mode. So if you're trying to do, call operators on a type that doesn't exist, it'll give you errors. It really does help you write quality code, assuming you want to write quality code. As I say to people who starting out in scripting, don't worry about how clean or messy or horrible your code looks. If it solves a problem, that is the most important thing. Yeah, don't worry about it looking nice and being efficient. Everything else, the most important thing is for it to solve the problem. So, the things I'm talking about here are very much not to say for beginners. Although, if you're just starting out, you take these on board from day one, it's going to make it a lot easier to write that robust, reliable code. So you'll spend less time troubleshooting and more time having fun scripting or doing other things. I script for leisure, but I'm sure people have actually got lives and do things like playing games, whereas I just play PowerShell. Same for parameters as well. So parameters to scripts are defined as variables. If it's a string, make it a string. So we've seen the get type. So for instance, a common one is if you're using credentials, because one of the things I'll say is never, ever, 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 ever write a script that takes a clear text credential, mainly because I do a lot of work with the auditing of creation and termination of processes. You capture the command line, you've captured a clear text password. Okay, it goes into the security event log, which needs to be an admin, but it might be a password for something you don't want the local admin on that system to know. So I'm going to make it take a credential. So how do I know what type of credential is, for instance? Well, we'll call it $cred equals get-credential. Another one of Guy's tips, when you're prompting for a credential interactively, always give a message so somebody doesn't think it's a phishing prompt. So, this is not a phishing exercise. Okay, I can't type, but I'm running out of time. So you can see now we can see that message. Blah, which happens to be my admin password. Oh, look, a 4-letter password as well. So $cred, we can see, I could get a password and things out if I wanted to. That's not the point here. I can pass that as a argument, but how do I strongly type that? Well, again, as I said before, just get type, full name. Without quite so many L's, yeah? So I could put that into my script, or again, if I can just do SCB, set clipboard, I can just go up, Control V, bang, $credible, which I'm not, equals, and then whatever. If I'm assigning it here, otherwise I'll just actually do null. So if I'm going to declare something, I'm not going to set it to what it should be yet. I always declare it to null. Similarly, if I've finished with something, I will set it to null as well so that I don't accidentally use it. For a string, doesn't really matter, although if you've got a clear text password somewhere, because we can actually get clear text passwords out of credentials, it's built in, but only as the user and the machine that created the credential. So I can say get network credential.password. So I might need to use that within the script, so something else might not take a clear text password. Again, as I said before with errors, just think security in your scripts as well. Perhaps I should do a session on writing secure or writing scripts which aren't really bad at security-wise. If you assign that to a variable inside your script, so $clear equals, and you use it somewhere else, when you finish with it, what I tend to do, $clear equals, just to overwrite it. Yeah, and you could do a remove variable if you wanted to. But that might leave the data on the stack. And well, is that a problem? Yeah. What if someone then dumps that process and then loads it into either WinDBG or just uses the great sysinternal strings utility? Yeah. Oh, this is turning into a security session. It's not quite what I intended. 15 minutes left or thereabouts. So this was saying declare to to known values. If you've got something which is going to be an integer, I quite often will set it to -1 because I know -1 is an illegal value for what I'm using it for. It doesn't always mean, you can use negative numbers. Sometimes it pays to be negative. But then I know that I've set it into that state. So if you're prompting for something, please enter a value between 1 and 4, and you see the value is -1, somebody hasn't entered a value at all if you've initialized it to that. Yeah. So again, before you start running off using the value, check if it's actually your initialized value or actually being assigned to from somebody else. As also, yeah, deinitialization isn't a word, but I couldn't think of the better. Clean up, maybe tidy up. Depending on what sort of objects you use, they might have a dispose method or a close. If we're talking about file handles, things like that, and that's where I might close the file handle that I've got, depending on what I'm using, and then set it to null so that I can't accidentally use that file handle again. If I do, then I'll get a null pointer exception or equivalent in PowerShell, rather than it may or may not work depending on whether that file's around and how that particular commandlet behaves. I generally don't remove the variable, but I'll set it to null. Or in the case of things like sensitive data, I'll actually overwrite it with something else, so that sensitive information lives for as little time as possible within my script. So a few more hints and tips. I could go on and on and on. And well, you do, Guy, anyway. Oh yeah, thanks. Okay. It's difficult with a non-live audience, but well, no, I'm not suggesting you're dead, but comments, yeah, that will help you with robust code. Is because you'll come in, you'll look at something, go, God, why is it done that way? Right, that's wrong. You do it this way. And what you're actually doing is doing it the way the person first tried to write it and found it was a bug or otherwise, and had to code around it. And that might be you. It quite often happens to me. I can look at a script from a year ago and not even recognize it. Although a bit like with painting and other things, you certainly get used to styles. Yeah. $I, that's about as meaningful as something which isn't very meaningful. So even in a script, I'll call it $index. Like I said, when you're using PowerShell interactively, because that's one of the beauties of PowerShell, I can use interactively, which I do a lot for troubleshooting. I can look at processes, events, files, etc. Then maybe not so much when I'm using it interactively, but certainly in scripts, I use meaningful names. And you go, well, I can't be able to type all that. Tab complete, yeah, great for us lazy people. Somebody who shall remain nameless used to have this at the top of pretty much every one of their scripts. I can't even talk. I'm not having a beer, honest. $error action preference equals silent continue. What does that mean? Ignore all errors. Yeah, if an error happens, I'm going to ignore it. That's the equivalent of the VBS on error resume next. It's like, yeah, okay, so if it's a simple script, it doesn't really matter. But it's something that's going to go and delete 100 AD users which satisfy these particular properties, and something's gone wrong, and suddenly you haven't filtered the users and you're deleting 10,000 users because you didn't get the error back because of this line, then yeah, you've only got yourself to blame. But as we've seen in some of my examples already, do use it on individual commandlets, either because you're going to get the error in your own error variable via the minus error variable, or because you're actually not interested. If I'm doing tidy up stuff, I'm going to remove this temporary file. What if it fails? What if someone's already deleted it, but it's tidy up? There's nothing I can do, so I'll just hide the error, because what I don't want is if it does fail, I don't want to stick an error up because it will confuse people. Go, oh, it's all failed. Oh, it hasn't worked. And it's one error about deleting a temporary file because somebody had tidied up before the script is finished. Yeah. So again, right back to the earlier slides, which we'll make available after the session, is there any point telling anybody about this error? Null and zero are spelt differently for a reason. They are subtly different. So if you're doing a not, that's why I've got the minus not on the end, or the exclamation mark, shriek, bang, whatever you call it in your language, which I can use instead of minus not. That will be true both for null and zero, but make sure you know what you're actually testing for. So you could say if not $Fred, where $Fred's a variable, or you could say if $Fred not equal null, $null, or if $null not equal to $Fred, which is actually a preferred way to do it, because that will catch some problems you get with arrays. so that you don't confuse empty arrays with non-existent arrays. A small problem, but it can actually happen, and there's some notes in this slide, which you probably won't get to, but about checking sizes and arrays exist before you start dereferencing them. Which leads me nicely onto this one, which is, yeah, I mean, if you're doing a DIR, for instance, so CLS$guy equals $dir. $dir, yeah, okay, live demos, don't you love them? Don't put a dollar in front of a command like that. You don't need to do that. Well, you could do actually if you wanted to, but yeah, let's not worry about that. So $guy actually is going to be an array. I've got 123 things in my guy each folder, so I can actually get at the first item. Just have to go back to see what I was actually talking about. So I can say $guy 0, and we can actually see what properties I've got. Select, which is a alias for select-object, and I've missed out the minus property. Again, don't do that if you write the script. You can see there are various things. So there's I can have a look at $guy dot full name, for instance, if I could actually type it. Yeah, but what about it might be something which doesn't exist. $guy dot the smeg parameter. Yeah, so some properties aren't always available on every object. So how can I do that without actually having to write a try catch around it and without erroring? Well, the easiest way is every single PowerShell variable has a PS object property. And that actually allows, you can see there, it actually allows us to get at the properties, which is a hash table or a dictionary. So I can actually very easily look it up. I don't have to do a where object or anything like that. I can just say, does the smeg property exist? And that's coming and say, well, maybe that's empty. No, $null. Yeah, so that's true. But let's go for one that I know exists. So let's go for attributes. So that's false. So what I'm saying here is what I would generally do rather than going, this smeg approach is, let's say, I would do it something like this. If that is non-null, so I could actually say $null equals like that, or I could just have it on its own. And then I can start actually referencing the property. Yeah, so I can start to use it, because the way an AND works is that it doesn't evaluate what's on the right-hand side if it doesn't need to. As in, PowerShell will look at that and go, okay, well, if that property smeg doesn't exist when I come to run the code, then I'm not going to do the second bit of the AND because I don't need to, because both bits need to be true. If the first bit's false, then there's no point doing the second bit. Yeah. So for efficiency, but we can get away with that by writing these on one line. $smeg equals head. Obviously, smeg being a brand of refrigerator that's available. And what have I done wrong? Yeah, typical one. I'm using an equals. I've done this totally accidentally. This happens to me all the time. Yeah, I was trying to assign it. What was I trying to assign? I was trying to test for equality. Yeah, drinking too much beer. That's my excuse. And yeah, why does that happen? Because I've put a equals, not a not equals. Yeah, so you see, even the best people, I'm not calling myself the best by a long way, make mistakes. Yeah, so look at it, don't go, oh, panic. Yeah, I've looked at the red code, it says the property smeg, so it is looking at the right hand side. Why not? Because I've got my test wrong. Yeah, so because the property doesn't exist, then it doesn't work. Whereas if I change this to let's say length, because it's short and I can probably type it without, and we'll change it to something like greater than 1. Yeah, trust me to pick something. What is guy 0? Trust me to pick something which is empty. Trust me not to be able to type. Jeez. Yeah, so that's a folder. I could do a where clause. I will use 99. Yeah, why have I gone wrong there? Because I'm using hard-coded values. Yeah. Yeah, I got there in the end, you see. Yeah, yeah, Son, you've got a good point, mate. Yeah, in that we all make mistakes. Yeah, to err is to human, is to be human. To really fuck up, you need a computer. We do make mistakes. We live with it. Yeah, you see people like Jeffrey Snover, you know, the Mr. PowerShell himself, the guy who invented it, do live demos. He'll make mistakes. We live with it. Nobody is perfect. Well, maybe no. I've kind of proved I'm not perfect, haven't I? So yeah, check a property exists before you start using it. Again, I've said this already. This is scripting. Does it make it more robust? Yes, it does, because it makes it less ambiguous. If you're calling a function with 10 parameters and you're not using name parameters, because you can use positional parameters, you know, so the first argument is this, the second argument is that. You don't even need to declare them that way. PowerShell will automatically figure that out. It just makes it difficult to understand. Yeah, name parameters are there for a reason. If you're writing your own functions, your own commandlets, please use meaningful argument names. Yeah. Again, long, yeah, because you can tab complete them. Yeah, and yeah, parameters, particularly to the scripts themselves. So if you're giving a script to a customer and saying, well, yeah, this argument is this value, this is this value, as much as you can, sanity check them before you even start doing any processing. So, yeah, this is my input file. Okay, let's check that input file exists. Several ways to do it. I can do it in the parameter block itself, or I can just do it as perhaps the first thing in the code to say, does this rather important file exist? No, it doesn't. Right, I'm going to exit now, probably by throwing an exception, but I'm going to give a meaningful message going, this file doesn't exist. You might say, oh, the folder doesn't exist. So, yeah, again, back to the let's give meaningful errors. Again, you've seen use aliases, so I've used dir, for instance. Is something an alias or not? So I can say get dash alias dir. That's actually an alias for get child item. In fact, you know, if you're a Unix or Linux head, then there's also, you know, if you're thinking, well, what is the alias for this? You can actually have a look for definition. So I can say definition is get child. And look, I can even tab complete that. Yeah, so you can find, but don't use aliases in scripts. I mean, something like select, you could probably get away with it, but would you get away with PS? I mean, again, if you're a Unix, Linux person, you know that gives a process list, but you see PS in scripts, it's going to make it much more difficult to understand. Yeah. The more somebody understands the scripts, the less likely they are to butcher it and make it less robust. Yeah, so it all comes back to that. Probably the last slide I'm going to show, although all slides will be made available after the session. So again, check an array size before you start indexing into it. So I should have an array $guy, if you remember. Guy is a ray of sunshine. Yep, so there's just happens to be an error one. What about 999? Well, if you didn't have this set strict mode, and you can't do a get strict mode, interestingly, if I hadn't have done that first, that would have just come back with an empty value. But is that good? No. Always check, you know, the size of your array. So I know I shouldn't go greater than index 122, because of course indexes start at 0. But I can get the last item by -1. Yeah. So if I go to 123, which is going to be an error because it's 0 to 1 less. Yeah, we can see it's the same item. If I want to get the second to last, then yeah, -1 doesn't give me the second to last, nor does -12, strangely. So -2, yeah, second to last, and so on. So yeah, check the bounds of your array and check you've got an array first as well. $guy minus is array. Yeah. because if I say, if I've mixed up and let's say $ton equals 0, and I go $ton.count, I get an error because it's not an array. But if I've not strongly typed it somewhere, it's more likely to give me that error, and I can then say Control delete to delete a word. You don't need to hit and Control backslash to delete back. I can say $ton is false, so I could wrap that in an if. Yeah, if it's an array, then I'll do something. Which actually is a note later on about sometimes. Oh look, my timer has expired, so I'll just finish off this slide if I may, Alex. Probably about a minute or so.
Oh, sorry. Bye. Next one.
Yeah. You know what I like about you, Alex? Absolutely. Oh no, I better not say that. Absolutely nothing, because it will end my session. I'll get kicked off Zoom and never invited back. Yeah, this is what I wanted to make because it happens quite a lot. Is that a lot of commandlets, if they only return one item, will not return an array. They'll return the item, the object. Whereas if it returns 2 items, it will return an array. So how do I make sure that I always get an array? Very easy. Even if you strongly type it, it's not guaranteed to give you that. Wrap it like that, which is how you would manually put an array together. So if I say get child item because I'm lazy, then even if that had 1 item, in fact, that will still be guaranteed to be an array. The other way around is, what if I get an array and I'm only expecting 1 item? It depends, yeah. Sometimes you can select the first or last, depending on the sort order, maybe creation time, modification time or something, alphabetical maybe. Sometimes if you've got more than 1 item, you've got to throw an error saying, well, this is ambiguous. I don't know which of these X items, and again, you can return the items in your error message. Say, well, I was expecting 1 item and I got 4, and the 4 items are these. Yeah, give that as much context as you possibly can. Again, minus as, yeah, these all make sense. The minus as is quite useful, so I can say, actually, I'm going to search for one I created earlier. So Control R, date, time. You say, okay, so because I'm not US, we use proper date formats over here. Very last thing I'm going to show, yeah, honest. Whereas if I try and cast that explicitly, even though I've got a UK locale, so that's the 30th of October, that errors, yeah? So notice the as time works, and I could assign that to a variable. So minus as is a softer way of casting stuff. Again, I'll make these available. Hopefully Alex has got a recording of it, and my festive shirt and hat. I hope you've found some useful stuff in there. I'll be in the chat room afterwards if people want to ask questions or just generally insult me, and that's fine as well. Thank you very much.